Start again.
I'm leaving that in for sure.
I'm Kim and I'm married to an addict alcoholic.
Hi, Kim. My name's Chris, and I am an addict alcoholic.
Hi, Chris.
This last week has been absolutely crazy. We've been recording more days than we haven't recorded. So we're getting back to Duck Duck Grey Duke, the normal comedy interview show that we do. I guess it's not just comedy. We do a lot of mental health talk as well. Unfortunately, a lot of Me Too stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's what's been going on. But I did want to talk about, we have a guest that's going to be calling in, and Kim's going to be hanging out for a little while. I had a family member reach out that is struggling with addiction. And it was really tough because I've seen the love that this individual is capable of. And it sucks that because people have kind of made it seem like, of course you're going to act that way, that's fuel for them to continue to abuse substances. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And it makes them angry on two fronts. One, the fact that people assume this about him. Two, the fact that they continue to let themselves fall into that cycle. And we had some breakthroughs, but with people that reach out, I love you guys. It's a part of my recovery. I'm supposed to help those in need and do service work, but I can only do so much. I'm still really early in my recovery. I'm just hitting 6 months tomorrow.
Yeah. You hit 180 days, but technically, 6 months is tomorrow.
Yeah. So I hit my 180 days, but whatever.
The month mark though is tomorrow. Yeah.
So in that regard, I've learned a lot, and there are things that help me for sure. But like I've said on here before, if you have underlying issues, don't let, if you're trying to help your friends, don't focus on the addiction part. Ask them how they're doing. More often than not, there's something else going on, and could have been going on for a long time, and is just now starting to become a hindrance to their lifestyle. And so now you're starting to notice these things, whereas maybe it was kind of like an underlying thing prior. So with this family member, they are capable of a lot of really incredible things, and I wish that I had more to offer, but because of the pandemic, there's only so much advice you can give. And with people being unemployed and things like that, furloughed, whatever, if you don't have proper medical insurance, like I did, I got super, super lucky. We say that all the time too. I got really lucky with the facility that I got to go to, the support system that I have. Not everyone has that. And so in that regard, I can't say go to the same treatment center that I went to, because not everybody's... Fiscally, yeah. Yes, fiscally, perfect. Not everybody can afford that, and not everybody's health insurance covers that stuff. So
yeah, and we got lucky because you had a hospital stay before treatment, so we hit your deductible before you got to treatment. So we got lucky in that aspect. I mean, we're still paying medical bills, but in comparison to what we could have been paying for just, treatment, we got, I mean, it's not lucky that you were hospitalized, but health insurance wise, it just worked.
Yeah. And, in the state of Minnesota, there's something called a Rule 25.
Yeah. So that's a chemical dependency assessment that you would complete. If you have county insurance, you would contact the county you reside in, and they can direct you on where to get your assessment done. If you have private insurance or insurance through your employer, you would call the number on the back, and they would direct you where to go. With Hazelton, though, I know you did a Rule 25 when you were in the hospital, because they had you do a CD eval. But I think if I can recall, I think Hazelton does their own over the phone. That's why they called you that day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it really depends what I would do if you are interested in treatment and you're not sure if your insurance covers it. Call your insurance company and they should tell you where you're in network. If you do not have insurance because of the pandemic, call the county you reside in and see what you can do. Say that you're struggling and you need, you're interested in treatment, and see if they can help you either apply for county insurance or something. But I get it. It's hard. Meeting patients in the, ER that wanted to go to treatment. It's not like and especially like my job, I can't get people into treatment. Like, you have to have an evaluation done to get into treatment, whether like Hazelton did their own, or if you get a Rule 25 or whatever done, like you need that assessment, because that will actually determine if you need inpatient and outpatient. Your alcohol disorder was severe. I mean, you attempted and all that. So that's why you needed the level of inpatient. Some people can just do outpatient and that's okay. Yeah. It depends on your level of addiction. The family member you're talking about likely would need inpatient. It really just depends on where their addiction is, what they're addicted to, because, and again, thankfully you were hospitalized before you went. I mean, because you had already gone through your withdrawal, so you didn't have to be in the medical unit of Hazelton before going to treatment.
Right. Yeah.
Because they need you to be completely withdrawn from your drugs or alcohol to start treatment. Obviously, you're not going to get anything out of treatment if you're actively withdrawing. You're going to feel like crap and all this. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know that we've ever talked about that part of it, but yeah, that's a good point.
You were home for 3 days. You went through withdrawals while you were in the hospital, which was awful. But at least you got medicated and people were monitoring you to help you through those withdrawals. And then you came home and you were obviously sober. And then you go to initially. And I don't know if every treatment center is set up like this, but Hazelton, there's a detox medical unit area. And they had gotten your medical records from the hospital, and, they knew that you had already gone through your withdrawals and you were cleared. So thankfully we sat there for maybe 4 hours?
Yeah.
And then you got to transition to treatment right away, which was huge.
Yeah. So all of our stuff sounds easier than what people normally have to go through. We got lucky in a lot of those things. How quickly everything kind of happened and got me into the unit that I was on here. I think he's gone. To sum that up, as far as getting somebody, if they want help and they want that treatment, it doesn't happen right away. So they do. If you're going to be there for them.
Which sucks, because sometimes when people are ready to change and ready to start treatment, they want to start right now, which I get, because that can switch so quick. Like, they get sober, all of a sudden, okay, I'm ready to go to treatment. And it's like, just kidding. You have to do all these things before you can get into treatment. And during that time, what if they're like, well, F it, I'm going to just keep drinking then. Yeah.
So, be willing to reach out in those ways too, and help those individuals with kind of the tougher side of things, because it's easy to shake that stuff off if it seems like there's any roadblock. If those people are on the fence about recovery anyways, it doesn't hurt to, if you're willing to, or finding somebody who's willing to stick with them to make sure that they get the help that they need.
Yep.
Okay, and with that, we now have our guest caller this week. I'm really excited because there's an aspect of the rollerblading scene that, so in extreme sports in general, we've kind of talked about it on other podcasts, but there is this idea of tour life equals partying, and contests as well equal partying. And with extreme sports, you have massive age differences. You can have a 14-year-old who is skating around with people sometimes in their 30s, and they but they kind of forget the fact that these kids are so young, and they are, unfortunately, are along for the ride. So, John, I'm so sorry. How do you say your last name?
Labez.
Labez. Okay. So we have John Labez on the line. Actually, I'm sorry. Are you okay with your name being out there?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Editor, journalist, photographer, art director, just an all-around very creative and inspiring individual, I would say. So, John, I have many questions.
Ooh, okay. Well, see if I can answer them in any reasonable sort of manner.
Okay. So something that I want to highlight right off the bat is your are you first generation immigrant?
It's dicey. So on my mom's side, I am first generation. On my father's side, he's Filipino, like raised in Hawaii. But here's the thing: is like him and his father were both like in the Philippines when the U.S. still occupied it as a territory, and they fled the country right as there was a regime change. Long story short, my grandfather was supposed to be on a flight for the president of the Philippines. The plane crashed, killed everybody like in it, but my grandfather wasn't on the plane. With that regime change, it was like, hey, they were like on a hit list of like people they had to purge. So they petitioned the U.S. State Department to get visas to come to Hawaii, and have been in Hawaii ever since maybe the mid 50s, I want to say.
Wow.
Or maybe early 60s. Yeah. My grandfather was actually on the USS Missouri as one of the journalists who reported on the surrender of Japan.
Oh my God!
His apparently his photos like hanging in the Smithsonian, from what I've heard from my dad's side of the family.
That is incredible. Something that really interested me in conversation that we had a few weeks ago was you had mentioned that your parents gave you an American sounding name to try and make things easier for you. Do you mind like embellishing on that a little bit?
The story my father kind of put out there was, well, your mother wanted to name you something like Juan Miguel or something very Latin, and he was adamantly against it. He was like, hey, I want a name that my kids can blend into like the society like well enough. Like my father had a very particular name, Lowell. Lowell Olympus. Grandfather's name was Ricardo. So it's like, okay, like not super ethnically sounding, but what I didn't know until fairly recently was like my mother's like side of the family, like they're all like they apparently was Sephardic Jews that left Europe like right at the start of like World War II and ended up like out here or ended up in Latin America. And yeah, anyway, just they were going to name me something very uniquely biblical or Latin. Yeah, but my dad's kind of thing was, well, I just want my kids to blend in. Like my brother's name is Brian. I mean, that's pretty Brian and Jonathan, pretty standard American names.
Wow. Was there drinking in your household when you were growing up?
There was. My father, he definitely drank. It was social to a degree up until like my mother had an affair, and my dad took to drinking, so things got violent real quickly. Had some particularly nasty moments that I don't think like a kid should have gone through, but there it is. One of my own earliest memories was, I assume my father had been drinking. They got into a fight. My dad got a vase and threw it into a bedroom vanity, smashed the damn thing to bits. And my mother was cleaning it, crying like one of those old 50s style rocket vacuums.
Oh,
and that's
wow.
one of my earliest memories. And I remember being at that age being wow, I never want to treat a woman like this. Like, and I was probably like 4 or 5. like that has stuck with me. Like, so when, yeah, like I didn't want to ever treat anyone like I cared about, especially like women, like just from there on out, just like I lived it. I mean, like, and on both sides, it wasn't like my dad was the only one who was not, was violent, or not even like, I don't even want to call it violent, but it's just
tumultuous.
Shit happened. Yeah, tumultuous, right? Yeah. Mother's side, they had parties. Like, my mother was in her 20s. Like, she was 20 when she had me.
Oh, wow.
And, like her sisters are all within that same sort of range. And you know what? They had parties, and they brought their kids with them. They got smashed drunk, like hanging out with each other. And, another early memory, I think I was like 8 or 9, and probably, yeah. And my mother was like so pissed drunk, like on like the floor of my like her sister's house, my aunt's house, just being like, just like completely passed out. Like, I think she was like calling for me to be like, hey, let's go. I'm like, my aunt was like, dude, you're not going anywhere. Like,
wow.
So there's, yeah. It sounds a lot worse when I say it out loud now.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean,
but
sorry, go ahead.
But those are things you remember too,
Well, so what I was going to ask was, when you were that young, did you associate it with drinking, or did it seem like something that adults do? You know what I mean? Like kind of how we rationalize things when we're younger, or try to make sense of things. But looking back on it, then you say, oh yeah, that was drinking.
No, I definitely knew it was like drinking. It was just like, it was the only time that ever really like happened. My mother hung out with her sisters. They partied. My father went out with his friends and drank, like, or he was just at home drinking to kind of forget that his marriage is falling apart.
That's so much to deal with at such a young age. I mean, now I have 10 times the amount of questions. But what part of California did you guys grow up in?
Properly Los Angeles, Echo Park. I have lived here in this neighborhood for almost all my life, except for college years in Santa Cruz and London. I've like spent most of my time in this neighborhood. I refused to kind of move for whatever godforsaken reason.
Wow, that's very interesting as well.
Yeah.
So when you see that kind of stuff, because is it just you and your brother as far as siblings go? Yeah. And is he younger or older than you?
He's 4 years younger.
Okay. Was there any like feeling of needing to be protective of him in any of those scenarios?
I want to say yes. Like, we were definitely peas in a pod, kind of like we could confide in each other, like what was going on. It was like the only other person who knew what was going on was my brother. But on the other hand, like, he resented me for like a host of other reasons, like being more like my parents who were academics. As he got more cognizant of, like kind of his own, like his own proclivities, he just sort of resented me for it. So,
well, that's tough, man.
So we kind of split up. Like, we stopped really being close, I think, after about like 12, 13, somewhere in that range.
So when you started to get older, did things seem to change in the relationship that you had with your parents, in a sense that it felt less hostile, or was it the majority of your childhood?
See, I'm pretty weird about this. Like, I've been able to compartmentalize it and go, you know what? It wasn't the total sum of what they were, because my father wasn't an ideal like parent in that way. But on the other hand, I have like snippets that I can remember where he's like a very much like an involved parent. And, so like even throughout the whole fallout with my mother, which is like, okay, hey, he was super supportive about like my interest in science. He was super supportive of me taking on some pretty outlandish hobbies. But my parents divorced. Both my parents gave me the option, or gave both of us the option to say, who do you want to live with? And I chose my father, despite all the violent kind of like, or tumultuous upbringing. And he turned out to be a pretty decent guy. I mean, supported me through college, helped me kind of get me like straight in like in life. Let me stay with him after college. And even after I had like moved out, he was like, yeah, he called me like, hey, John, like I left food on like the stove. I'm like, first come, first serve. I'm like, I don't even live here. Like why are you getting me food? Or like, he'd be like, hey, I left groceries on like your desk. I'm like, okay.
In that sense, did his drinking habits change? Like, did they ever go through any type of sobriety, or did it just seem to kind of simmer and get better?
I think like my parents splitting was the best thing that could have happened to them. Like, I know most people are like, oh, my parents are splitting up, and I guess I should rewind it and be like, so I knew my parents were going through stuff. It wasn't like, this isn't even just watching them. I was like 10 or 11, and I found some like 3-4 page plus letter that my father had written out like to her. And it was something like, we're only together for the kids.
Oh.
Like, like at that really early age. And I was aware of, I was privy to a lot of things that I probably shouldn't have. But I was maybe 12 or 13 when they were already dating other people. And the only reason my parents officially divorced was she met someone and married the guy when I was 15. So, that's where I do have a half sister, but she hadn't kind of played, like she kind of didn't factor into the whole thing until like much later. But as far like, I'm sorry, I'm kind of like straying from the original question.
No, you're okay. So did he go through any type of sobriety or any changes in his drinking habits?
I think after they divorced, he definitely changed his habits. Like, it just became kind of like I hate saying it, just kind of became a weekend thing rather than like, hey, I'm at home and just popping tops, like sure. It was a difference. Like one is very much, hey, I want to go have fun with my friends. And my dad led a really wild lifestyle, like up until the end. If I said any of it out loud, it would just be like, whoa, your dad did what now?
Well, I mean, you don't have to share any of that stuff.
No, or to know, it is kind of what it is. And I mean, he would go out with my rollerblader friends to go party, like, and he was in his 60s. Yeah, I was like, there was one point where I was seeing them maybe once a month, and he was seeing them every week.
Oh wow!
We lived together.
That's wild.
Yeah. And the stories I heard from my friends are just like, what the okay. But otherwise, he was a pretty straight cut guy. I mean, he was just, you'd just be like, oh, he's just kind of a boring dude. And then once I kind of, the more I knew about my father, the more I knew, like, wow, like, I'm not sure why you settled down. I'm not sure why you had kids, because like, you lived in the Florida Keys in a VW doing acid and like with a record player in like the trunk. Okay, well, why did you have kids?
That is super interesting.
And with my mother, I mean, her habits have changed. She doesn't really do any drinking unless it's with all her sisters, and they're all kind of going back to the divorce for 2 seconds. I kind of cut ties with my mother after about 15 up until age 30, 32. I was just kind of, it took a long time for me to kind of get over what had happened. And once my father passed away a few years ago, we kind of got to talking about what were the details of what had happened. And it's like, oh, okay, so I've had this all wrong. okay, like going back, the affair was really just my mother doing something that my father had already been doing. Apparently, he had like 5, 6 plus affairs that like she knew about. Like, oh, so you both kind of did each other like that. Okay, well, you know what? I wish you'd told me this sooner because I wouldn't have been so upset about things. Doesn't make it better. Just contextualizes things.
Sure.
Sorry, that's complete family history. That's probably not.
No, man. I think that stuff's important because like sobriety and like all of this stuff is not as simple as just I saw drinking, I therefore then thought I had to drink, and that's the end of it. Yeah. Like there's all of these factors that come into an individual's perception of what substance is,
right, and
the role that plays in their life later on. So I'm glad that you're sharing this stuff because I think, and especially for your story, like I think that the way that you carry yourself is, I don't think anybody would know all of that shit because you're very professional, you're well spoken, and I mean, I know you're like kind of laughing as you're telling these stories, but it's more in the sense of like, man, can't believe that shit happened because I'm here now and everything's fine, but it doesn't take away from the trauma that you experienced.
I have just kind of worked really hard to kind of be functional. And I like to joke like, wow, given everything I've gone through, I'm like, why am I not a serial killer? Honestly, like,
yeah,
I should be much more violent. I should be much more like prone to crime or whatever. I should be like living like.
I think that's always something that I'm like really, really appreciative of, like recognizing when people go through that stuff and they still seem to have this really bright side to life because, like you're saying, all things lead to where you could have been. As you were growing up, what was your view on drinking? Like, when we become teenagers, that stuff kind of gets introduced. And did you stray away from that kind of lifestyle for a while, or?
It's really funny. Like, it's like a monkey see, monkey do moment where, like, I remember being maybe 8 or 9. My mother would take me to some like backyard party that like one of her friends had thrown, and there were some of us kids that were like, oh, hey, the kids, the adults are out drinking beer. So, hey, we snuck out beers and tried to drink beers and found it absolutely disgusting, at that age. And it's kind of like cigarettes. I mean, my dad was a prolific smoker then. And, hey, you try it once, you're like, oh, what is this? But beyond that, I was 12 years old and I had a creative writing class at the time. And we had to do a biography on our parents. I chose my dad, and wow, he was not going to like BS, 12-year-old me, because he started to talk about like what he had gone through. Like, that's how I learned about the Florida Keys. That's how I learned about every drug he had ever done. It's just like this long laundry list.
When you were 12?
Like, when I was 12, right. He was just like, this was for this biography. It's like, hey, I've done pot, I've done like acid, I did heroin twice. I had to like split it like 6 months because I knew if I did it again, I'd become a junkie. I've done like angel dust, I've done PCP. Like, he just kind of listed it all on the like, I've done mushrooms. He just like listed this long laundry list. And me not really realizing any of that time, like, I put it in the biography. Luckily, I had to read this in front of the class, mind you. And luckily for me, my teacher was an old hippie himself, and just kind of like, I got the silent nod, like, you probably shouldn't talk about this, but, I understand where you're coming from, kid.
Wow.
But he kind of demystified like drugs and that kind of culture for me, because I was a backyard, like, metalhead punk kid. I went to these $3 shows where people drank, people smoked, people did like prolific amounts of, illicit things there. And I was straight edge. Like I didn't smoke, I didn't drink, I didn't do any of that. I just was there for music, and I was surrounded by it constantly, but it wasn't anything I particularly felt pressure to do. Like, or I didn't want to do personally. Probably didn't really drink until maybe 18, 19 in college.
Do you think that the stuff that you saw growing up affected any of that in the sense that like, it just doesn't seem like it's going to add anything to where I want to go?
I think having experienced it firsthand, it definitely shied me away from it. I mean, it just didn't seem like anything I wanted to personally do. And while I was part of the whole, that whole backyard culture, all my friends outside of high school were all music people who were in their 20s and 30s. Like I was hanging out with people who were way the hell older than me. And I honestly don't really understand why they were like, yeah, let's let this like nerdy little like goth kid like come with us. But, I'd be home at 3, 4 in the morning or whatever and get dropped off. And, my dad was anyway, was just like, okay, like, you're home? Okay, cool. Well, you weren't arrested. That's cool. Like, there'd be some like Saturday night movie and he'd be watching and I'd just like come home and be like, hey, what's the movie you're watching? Oh, it's the one with Sandra Bullock. And I'm like, oh, really? Which one? I'm like, it's very matter of fact. Like my grades were, A's and B's, so he didn't seem to have a reason to police me.
Ah, I see.
As long as my grades were good, he didn't seem to care what I was up to, really. Which was not the same for my brother. That when he was, and I mentioned this to you, like when he turned 12, I mean, that's when he started drinking. He did not take this the same route I did, and he has been an alcoholic now since he was 12. He is 32 now, as of a week ago.
Well, and I mean, that goes to kind of what we were talking about before, which is that everybody deals with trauma differently.
And I think everyone has a different level of resiliency too. Like we all have different levels of resiliency. So me and you can get in the same car accident, and the way you adjust to the trauma after and I do is going to be different. That's
actually a great analogy, because a car accident can seem like nothing to one person, and every time somebody hears a car door slams for the next person, it sends them into PTSD. So, yeah. I mean, with the relationship between you and your brother kind of waning, like, did he skate at all?
He did. He was, he actually started rollerblading before I did. And it was him and the neighborhood kids just kind of rolling around and doing their thing. By the time I picked it up, the neighborhood kids had sort of stopped. I stole his rollerblades to like learn up the street. And, but he still would be the one to introduce me to what would be my core group of friends today.
Oh, wow.
One of the guys he's probably the oldest friend I have now at this point. I think I've been skating 22 years. I've known this guy 22 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And he's, he's kind of like my unofficial family at this point, because our families are so intertwined. Then we have some of my not older friends, but, other friends who I'd meet because I met that core group. But it was really my brother who introduced me to like these friends, because he was in a class as like one of them. And it was like a whole apartment complex, like full of rollerbladers. I think like that complex had like 30, 40 kids who skated.
Wow.
Like just on their own. Yeah.
And that's got to be tough. So do you struggle with that? In the sense that like there are things that you owe to your brother, things that have obviously made a huge impact on you. Is it frustrating watching him go through what he's going through? knowing that there's these great things that he has to offer. Does that make sense? I kind of worded that a little strange, but
No, I get the gist of what you're saying. I mean, he fell out of rollerblading fairly quickly, and he ended up a b-boy like every other rollerblader of the early 2000s. Like, you just ended up in b-boy culture, which I don't think really helped his case stray away from like drinking and drugs and that whole sort of culture that was so prevalent then. Like, it's a b-boy production, like Brian Bell and all of that. That kind of lifestyle just kind of appealed to him.
Well, and I mean, what was your neighborhood like back then? Were there a lot of kids that were using? Was there any like gang related stuff going on that he was exposed to as well?
The Echo Park. Okay, so this is like, he never got involved in the gang portion of it, but he definitely was like, he did graffiti. He was a bomber. He was part of a crew, had multiple crews. But that's very separate from like gang culture out here. But the neighborhood I grew up in, Echo Park, was throughout the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, very like entrenched in gang culture. Like, I got held up at like gunpoint, like in broad daylight, just going to go do laundry for like a Walkman. Ugh. Like, this was maybe 2001. Like, how many Walkmans like are really floating around there? I got to watch one of my friends just get beat up for a very similar thing. Like, 4 Walkmen, 3 guys pulled up on him and just was like, "Stop, where you from?" Wailed on him. And unfortunately for me, I was with a friend of mine who was part of the 18th Street Gang. His cousin is actually the leader of that at the time, and he was very much like, "I want to intervene, but it would cause like a gang war, like, for me to intervene. So you're just gonna have to let your friend get beat up for a Walkman."
Oh fuck, man. Okay,
yeah.
I don't mean to deviate too much, but do you go to therapy? Like, but how? Now I'm more curious because how are you able
resiliency, Chris?
Resiliency, yes, I know. But when I hear this stuff, the empath in me is like, how the fuck do you process these things? And if your brother was having to see this shit too, like, it seems like you guys dealt with these things in very different ways. And I'm just curious as to like, what is it that you do?
How did you process through all this, and how did you cope through all the trauma that you've experienced?
Thank you.
See, this is, again, like I said, I kind of have a tendency of compartmentalizing it. It's just one of those, I think it's like a funny way of how I deal with things.
Real quick,
I'm going to therapy.
What does compartmentalize mean?
I just sort of split up all my experiences into their own little boxes.
I see.
They exist as their own index cards that don't really intermingle unless I want them to intermingle. And I have kind of a very odd kind of condition actually called alexithymia. It is not quite recognized as its own condition in the DSM, but it is kind of this, hey, you're really bad at like connecting emotions. My emotions are almost separate from the physical response. I will recognize the physical response before I recognize the emotional response. Wow. I am more aware of things on an intellectual level, but I'm not very aware of them on a, I can't intuit very well. Like, if you're an empath, you're in tune with those emotions. If you're someone with alexithymia, you don't really process that you're going through this. It's more like, it's like a time delay. It really is like a time delay, because you'll be experiencing the emotion on a physical level and you'll be going, why do my hands hurt? Why do I feel flush? Like, what's going on? And you're like, why does my stomach feel sick? Like, I have no idea. And then, you'll kind of that emotion is going through the background until you hit this brick wall where you can't contain it anymore. And it just turns into this, like, it's either 0 or it's 60.
Wow.
Like there's no in between. I've been aware of this for the last 4 or 5 years, something like that. And I've been able to kind of intellectualize the whole thing and go, okay, hey, what are the physical signs? What do they connect to? How does that relate to the emotions I want to portray? Okay, you have to kind of, if you can figure out the early symptoms and you know what to look for, you have to kind of explain to people in a very matter of fact, like, hey, I may not be able to figure this out. If it looks like I'm upset and I don't look upset, honestly, just ask me.
Wow.
So I think my upbringing is very much the reason why, I have this. I was my way of kind of functioning. So like, hey, how do I process all that? You don't. It's almost like it processes in the background. Yeah. So like when my, when my father had his stroke and spent essentially 6 months, 8 months kind of in nursing homes and just kind of completely mentally, deteriorating. I mean, I saw him every day. I just didn't really process that it was all going on. But on the plus side, it keeps you really level-headed because that emotion hasn't hit you. I almost know that, like I said, there's a time delay. So I get to go, okay, I have this many days, I have this many weeks, I have this many months to kind of, before it actually clicks in my head. So then I have to go do what I need to do and process it all and go, okay, like dealing with the medical profession, you can't be emotional. It's very much like, okay, what's going on? Okay, can you explain to me what's going on? Can you tell me what I need to do? Okay, let's do this. And while someone may be grief stricken, I'm more like, okay, I'm okay till, one day it's just like, oh yeah, I am not okay.
Wow.
But that's what I mean. It lives in, everything kind of lives in its own box. But as I've gotten older, I've gotten better at being able to integrate the two. But it also can cause some severely screwy issues as a person. You're like, why do I feel this way? I'll put it this way. When you feel hungry, you may think to yourself, my stomach hurts, I feel hungry. For a good chunk of my life, it was more like, my stomach hurts. What the hell?
Oh, I see what you're saying. There's nothing that you can associate it with.
Right. And then it just I was such a, because I skated and, had that, I was chronically skinny for so many years. I mean, I'd almost say whoa, I had friends look at my photos and go, yo, were you doing meth then? You're so
wow.
Yeah, I just wouldn't realize it. Now I'm like, oh, my stomach hurts. I should really eat, huh? That's what that means, huh? I should eat. You want an honest answer of probably how I dealt with my entire childhood. That's probably why I was able to kind of come through it okay, which was everything lived in separate boxes, and everything I experienced and felt really didn't get a chance to, coalesce into something else. But then again, hey, I don't know, angry teenage me would probably disagree.
That is interesting in the sense that, so when how long ago did you find out about this condition?
4 years ago?
About 5 years ago, give or take. Well, maybe longer now, because I think I was 29, so I'm 30. Yeah, okay, so yeah, 29, 36, yeah. So 7 years ago now. Even longer now.
So when you saw the things that your brother was going through, would it feel frustrating because there's some things that feel more cut and dry to you
I'm actually like in this way, I'm actually pretty understanding. Is like because of my eclectic childhood, because of the people I knew who had, to me, like one of my earliest close friends in my teens. I mean, he told me like he had this full breakdown explained to me like he was hanging out with one of his friends and they were just like peas in a pod, and I guess his friend, fell into heroin use, and he ended up watching his friend like die on heroin in front of him. And I got to see him just retching and, full sobbing. And this is a guy who's like 250 pounds, like did backyard wrestling, just like this top sort of dude, and just fully in the barrel of that. And, I got this, a lot of my friends, I guess because I wasn't particularly judgmental, I guess, would tell me a lot of these experiences. So when I got to be older, I was just like, dude, it takes all sorts. Like it's not my place to judge.
That makes you that much more of an enigma to me, because you have these aspects of yourself. Oh, sorry. Hold on real quick. Okay, so it's just you and I from here on out. What's your limit when it comes to trying to help someone?
Oh, okay, that's a good one. Damn.
Like, do you feel like you've been taken advantage of in?
Yeah, I think early on, because I wasn't really keenly aware that, hey, people will take as much as you give them. And I think as I've gotten older, especially in my 30s, I just kind of had to go, I got really tired of doing it. It's like, hey, I can give you as much as I can possibly give you, but just to let you know, I'm very upfront and say, just to let you know, there was a breaking point, and you're tirelessly close to that. So if you want me to help you, you need to you can't just use me for support. You can't just use me for propping up whatever shenanigan you're up to. You have to show me that you want actual change, because at some point I'm just, you're just using me as a mouthpiece for your own desires, your own unbidden thoughts. Like, you have to tell me that, fuck, and not even just tell me, you have to show me that this is, you want to commit to this sort of change, or to what you're coming to me about. Like, hey, if you want me to help you, I will help you as much as I could physically help you.
Well, and unless you're a fucking drug and chemical dependency counselor, it's hard to know what is what seems to be the person that coming through, and it looks like they're going to make change, and what's ramping up to simply get as much out of you as they can so that they can go back to using in the way that they see fit.
All right.
So, and with rollerblading too, there's so much of that. There's a lot of assuming. When a new company shows up, there's an assumption that that company therefore has money, and they're going to be able to pay me as long as I support them in a way that I see fit. And there's all kinds of tumultuous dynamics and all of these misunderstandings. I don't want to say ignorance, but to a degree it's an ignorance to kind of how industries really work. And I would imagine that you've been put in some hairy situations in that regard as well. So it seems like for a large chunk of your life, you've year in, year out kind of been submitted to that type of, I don't mean to call it abuse, but situations that I wish you hadn't been put in, is what I will say.
Yeah. I mean, like, I didn't personally intend on ending up in like the blade industry to sort of happen, and just you shoot some photos with someone, and next thing you know, it's like, oh, hey, can you shoot photos? Can you shoot photos? Then you're working with people more and more often, and then you kind of, I don't know, then you end up at BMAG somehow. I don't understand how any of this really happened for me, but I've definitely gotten to experience the uglier side of the industry, and, you know, gotten to hear some stories that, you know, they're genuinely heartbreaking. I mean,
yeah. Well, and you and I have sorry, I was going to say, you and I have talked about how that age dynamic, and you had given that example of in the music scene how that happened to you, but in the skating scene we've seen that happen a lot, and it's only within the last like year that I've even thought about that, like the fact that I was hanging out with kids that were much younger than me, but because their talent was at the same level, if not better, I then kind of viewed them as an equal or as a peer, and I think let them get away with more than I should have. And there's just a lot of God, what's the phrase? Culture, assumed culture, as far as
I mean, that's, I think, what came with, you know, the videos of what was the early 2000s. It portrayed that lifestyle in a way that everyone wanted to do. I mean, being with my friends, you know, like driving around and like playing, you know, Biggie, smoking blunts, you know, and drinking 40s. I mean, that was really what my friends were all about at that age. I hate saying part of that was the emulation factor, because, hey, that's what was out in videos at the time.
Yeah.
It just kind of came to, like, you know, came hand in hand. And it's kind of it's an odd thing about rollerblading, where we idealize this golden era of rollerblading, but it also came with this, like, this side culture, this really, you know, this additional cultural mantra, which was, you know, party.
Yeah.
Like party the way you saw, you know, the people in these videos. Party because you're, you know, like, you're young, dumb, and, you know, full of like indiscriminate fluids.
Oh. Well, and I think too, something that I was just thinking of, like, you and I grew up in the era where we didn't see what was happening in rollerblading until a video would drop. And
right.
So there was this dopamine rush of like having a new DVD in your hand or having a new VHS in your hand. Are you outside, right, by the way?
No, that's my cat.
Oh, okay. But the like, so there's this really like positive thing that's associated with the touch and feel of that.
It's getting all sorts of horrible. No. Continue.
So having all of that excitement and all that build up, and you're dedicating, you know, 30 minutes to an hour of watching whatever the fuck is going to happen on this, and you're storing that. And for most skaters, like, we would watch those videos over and over again. One, to like learn new tricks, see what else is out there, what type of hammers are going down. But the stuff that whatever they decided to throw in there, you were getting exposure to that. And I don't think a lot of people thought of that or thought about that when they were making these skate videos.
Yeah, I don't think that was anything anyone really intended on. You know, it's just that it was part of the culture. You filmed it, and then it got packaged out to other people within it. And when your core demographic is all under the age of 20, well, guess what? They're going to be inoculated to it.
Yeah. So were there, what did you, how do I word this? I'm trying to keep it vague so that it doesn't like point to any one person, but, in skating, were there, people using drugs or using alcohol beyond kind of what seemed normal, but nobody was really doing anything about it?
I want to say like every Brian Bell production, like one of my first videos from him was Wanted, and that's all it was just, gang fights, getting drunk, throwing up, smoking out. And it was just a different kind of culture that you're like, oh yeah, this is just some wild stuff to watch. I mean, it's, to me, the 2000s version of watching a party on Insta Live or something, or someone on TikTok. I mean, that's really what this is. It's just wild crap going on. And
how about, let me pose the question in a different way here.
Okay.
When you started to hang out with other crews and meeting new people,
okay,
were you put in scenarios that made you uncomfortable or a little on edge, that maybe you'd seen in skate videos, but seeing it in person felt totally different?
Amongst people that I knew, I mean, it was like, hey, John, do you want to smoke out? Yeah, or do you want to drink? Well, I mean, that's just, I'll put it this way. My dad's kind of very laissez-faire kind of attitude about everything, was just like, yeah, okay. All my friends would come to my house to go drink and smoke out and do their wild crap, knowing my dad wouldn't care.
Oh.
But I didn't really participate in any of that. My house was the hangout because I had such a, cool laid back dad. So, my dad would go to his room. My friends would be partying in the living room till 2, 3, 4 in the morning.
That's really interesting. So what did that feel like to you? Did you feel like people were using you in that regard as well?
Oh yeah, no, that was they knew they could take advantage of it, and they did. I mean, even in high school, I mean, I had friends who would ditch to my house because they knew my dad would not care. He'd be like, all right, cool. They're your responsibility. Their parents call, it's on you, dog. Okay, thanks, Dad. And it sounds a lot worse saying that, but
well, I mean, I don't I want it to feel like that, because there could be people listening to this that are going through that, and because it's been a part of their life for so long, they don't give it a second thought. And I want people to know that you deserve more than friends who are going to take advantage of you in that way, especially if it's just so that they can use and
right,
not have to worry about somebody giving them a hard time for drinking or using drugs and all that stuff. So I think it's important for it to feel heavy.
Yeah.
You and I know this is the empath fucking codependent side of me, but your story deserves to sound as heavy as it's coming out. You do a very good job of making it easy to digest, and I appreciate that about you, but it's not right what you were put through. It's not right. And not that I'm blaming anybody, but it's not something that people should be submitted to, and I just want people to know that they deserve respect and they deserve happiness to whatever extent that means to them. If that just means that on a Saturday night you leave a skate session or whatever and you just get to go home and decompress rather than being put in charge of a bunch of people, then I hope that you know that you deserve that.
Yeah, I do now, but it's just like I said, when you're going through it and you're just kind of with your friends, and I'll be frank. I mean, the big draw for me with rollerblading, it wasn't really the whole skate part in the beginning. It was very much community. Sure. I accidentally ended up in aggressive inline because, like I said, I just like I picked up my brother's rollerblades and skated around and kind of just futz around recreationally. And in high school, I met guys in my PE class that were like, can you do a 360? Like, they're talking rollerblades. And they're like, can you do a 360? Yeah, I can do it. You know, they're just going back and forth. I'm like, I rollerblade, you know, not knowing what they meant. And, you know, like, I had no idea about this culture. And I just was like, hey, come hang out by, you know, the rotunda. A bunch of us are over there. I'm like, okay, great. I'll be frank. I was like this like nerdy little like academic kid, and ending up in rollerblading I suddenly had like a friend base and was part of this community that accepted me for anything, you know, for anything and everything, you know.
Yeah.
And I guess I bring that to like my ethos now, like with rollerblading, which is I want people in the community to be involved. I want there to be that connection. I still believe in it in this way that I think is rather idealistic, considering like all the back end. It's like once you kind of get into the industry side, you never really, you're like, oh, you don't really want to know these things. But,
Sure.
But that wasn't really the question.
No, and that's okay. More importantly, frontside Savannah or alley-oop Unity?
It's a Savannah. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I feel the same freaking way. So,
but geez. Oh man, that low key trick question. Okay, hey, you know, it's like answer that wrong. I am going to be answering hate mail my DMs for weeks.
I'm curious as well. With the way that you feel towards the community now, and I think the article that you did most recently when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the things that are happening right now, it's great that you look to what could prevent somebody from enjoying skating, which is a really simple way of saying, what's your home life like? How are you sleeping? And are you being unfairly, I hate to say persecuted, but are you being unfairly treated just by the way that you look? And how do we change that narrative? And so thank you for doing that. And I hope that you continue to do that. I think that's a really, really great thing.
I mean, no one in like Blade Media was talking about it, and internally we didn't really know how to process it at the BMAG staff, and it just kind of clicked in my head. It was okay. Like I kind of owe it to the community to talk about it. If no one's going to talk about this, then, and I'm looking at the staff and thinking, okay, like no slight to anybody, but y'all are white males. Like you don't really know what this is like. And I'm going, oh crap, I have to write this, don't I? No, like I'm thinking about more and more about, you know, who's in charge of Blade Media, and going, wow, white males. Okay, so you're not going to talk about this.
Well, at least not in the way that it deserves to be spoken about.
I suppose, but it's just something that wasn't being talked about, and I felt like I needed to do it for the community, if only for the sake of, hey, it's not important who I am, it's not important, you know, what my position in all this. It's that you recognize that this is a thing, and that here's how you can relate it to your own lives. And I had people message me and be like, oh, I completely forgot that, you know, this had happened to me. Like, apparently other people had similar incidents, and they hadn't really thought about it as, you know, covert racism until, you know, someone had kind of brought it back up. Like, oh yeah, that happened to me too. This had happened to me. You know, then we did the Philip Moore thing next after that.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah.
I'll have to look into that one.
Yeah, no, as soon as, like, the Amy Cooper and George Floyd like things like happened immediately, like everyone on staff was like, yeah, we need to like have Philip talk about all this. Like just his interview was already done. So we were just like, okay, we need to kind of like, he would absolutely have something to say on this. And it just ended up being great timing where it could follow my piece like afterwards.
Oh, that's awesome. So yeah. I'm going to go, back to, because I do got to wrap this up as much as I love, love talking about all this stuff. So I'm going to ask what advice do you have to people that are going through similar things as far as the family dynamic and having addiction kind of being prevalent and those traumatic things? Like, what were some things that helped you or things that you would have done differently or that you wish would have been handled differently? What are some things that you'd be willing to share with the listeners?
Oh, yeah. The first thing I want to say is like, it's having self-recognition, but hey, when you're in the barrel of it, then it's kind of hard to recognize that you might have an issue. It's a double-edged sword. You can tell someone, hey, well, why aren't you aware of your problem? But on the other hand, what if they're not aware of they have a problem?
Sure.
Kind of going back to what I said earlier, it's like, hey, being able to just say to someone like, hey, like not just say, hey, you have a problem, but it's like, hey, here's what I see, like from the outside, but not do it in this like judgmental way, because that's the first thing that's going to drive anyone away and put them on the attack, is for you to be like, yo, you have a problem. It's like fucking up things for me. Or it's like, hey, you are doing things that mess up. Like you're messing up X, Y, Z things. Like if you put them on the attack, then they're not going to want to seek help. They're just like, yo, I'm just going to shun people away because you don't understand, or you want to put me in this place to put me down. It's like, and the first thing, if you're in an addiction, is you're going to like find any reason to kind of shy away from people that are telling you not to do the thing that you're in. I think being open and just be like, like a friend of mine, dude, like he was another contributor for one, and he came out here, got real into drug culture, and he would tell me a lot of things that were just like seriously like, wow, okay, that's some really heavy stuff. But I approach it just saying, you know what, I'm here for you, dude. Like, no judgment. Like, you can tell me everything and anything. I will not judge you. And it's like, you're almost playing the role of therapist. You're like, just honestly, just tell me things. And if you can get, if you can find that one person to be honest, like you can be honest with, and for them not to judge you like that, it can make the world of difference. That person needs someone to confide in, especially if like they recognize they're in a spiral. It means everything to that person to try to understand, like that they're cared for and that their actions, their actions might suck, but that doesn't make them a bad person. I think good.
Oh, I was just going to say you're doing a fucking great job. You're saying all of the things that we normally say. So yes, keep going. Sorry.
No, it's like, it doesn't make you a bad person. It's just a bad, bad circumstance. And most people don't put two and two together. They assume that, hey, if you are doing this, like you engage in XYZ behaviors, you're a bad person. Going, like you're not a bad person until you do some real bad things. Like, but there is chance for redemption, but you do have to work at it. You have to regain that trust. And so like, if you break it with those people, but that shouldn't be a deterrent. I mean, like I said, finding someone you can confide in makes all the world of difference. But once you have that confidence, try not to break that trust, because then it makes it harder for that person to want to, emotionally invest in your actions. It's like, and no one intends on it happening. It just, what's going on? Shit happens, like you don't intend to go down this path, you don't intend on hurting anybody. You don't intend on doing the things you've done to have those addictions or to have these problems in life. It's just a circumstance of life that you have to kind of go, okay, there's a chance for me. There is hope. There is redemption. It's just, yeah, it's not even redemption. It's just, there is a chance for me to be okay. You know, just take it one day at a time and try to be a better person today and tomorrow, and, you know, just take it a day at a time.
Yeah. I think that's, I appreciate that, man. I appreciate as far as you've been willing to dive into all of this stuff. Where can people find your work, and the things that you guys are doing, as far as rollerblading is concerned?
If you want to donate to, like, my cat Tom, yeah, he could definitely use some cat food.
Sure.
25 pounds of cat, not the point. You can either find my body of work, I guess, on Instagram. It's JM Wabez. Really easy to find me. It's pretty much just my initials. There's BMAG, so it's BE-MAG.com, for all the work that Kevin Little and myself are doing in rollerblading, along with Ryan Lowy, who's back on staff, and Tyler Farrington out of Texas as our associate editor. Yeah, I mean, those are really the two best places to see, like, what we're up to.
Fantastic. Well, John, thank you again so freaking much for doing this, and you be well, stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon, man.
All right. Talk to you soon, and wish the wife a fair night, I guess.
I'll pass along the message.
All right. Talk to you soon, Chris.
All right. Peace, man. All right. Thanks for sticking around, guys. That was a great episode. I'm really glad that John was able to tell us as much as he did about trauma and things that he's been through, and how addiction has affected his personal life. If you or someone you know is in need of addiction recovery, you can go to aa.org. It's a good place to start, but there are all kinds of options out there for yourself or for your loved ones. And as always, please be sure to subscribe and share. And if you'd like to be featured on the show, feel free to message in on our Facebook page at DuckDuckGrayDuke, or you can email in duckduckgrayduke@gmail.com. You can remain anonymous, or like John, you can feel free to use your name. But otherwise, thank you guys all so much, and with that, we will pass.